HIV, AIDS, that shit suppresses itself if you take care of yourself medically. They ain't came up with no medication that can stop the herpes or slow the herpes down or make that shit undetectable. No, the herpes don't go nowhere. The HIV will go to sleep. The herpes goes to sleep for about 30 days or 21 days, depending on how stressed out your life is. Sylvester could certainly have tried to get himself back into the big time. He could have jumped his small-time manager, Tim McKenna, moved to New York or Los Angeles, put his finger on another pulse. After Fantasy, he seemed to want a different kind of life. There's nothing worse than a fallen star when the light burns out, and you still have these illusions, he said in 1982. If living without illusions meant performing on a smaller stage, so be it. He wanted control. He wanted to be home in San Francisco. He wanted freedom. He wanted to shop. He wanted to be in love. And he wanted to be able to still crawl around in sleeves with the best of them. Megatone, like Sylvester, homegrown and gay as could be, offered stardom without illusion. On All I Need, Sylvester thanked Timmy McKenna, the manager of the 80s, and Tip Warwick and John Hedges for choosing him, and dedicated a song to Marty Blackman and the Megatone staff. I'm so happy to finally have a home, he wrote. In the first few years of the 1980s, the acts that grew out of San Francisco gay dance world, such as J-Lo, Lavarde, and Paul Parker, routinely took their shows out on the mostly gay club circuit, where Sylvester, even when his fantasy career was stalling, was the reigning queen. One night in 1982, back from a club tour, Joe Carl Block and Lauren Carter went into a studio, smoked a joint, and listened as Patrick Crowley introduced them to his new LP, Mind Warp. He showed them the words they were to sing from songs with titles like They Came at Night, Mutant Man, and Going Home. He wanted them to sing about intruders who strike when you are alone, who made their move on the human race, who are a voice behind your eyes. He wanted them to sing about a voice that spoke to him in an ancient tongue he could recognize, calling out a warning. He wanted them to sing about an anemic red sun, a greenish glow, chemical contradictions in a vortex spinning around, planets falling down. He wanted them to sing lines like, uh-oh, 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 beware of darkness. I'm not singing that shit, Joe Carroll said. Yes, you are, he said. You're going to sing it just the way I wrote it. Patrick directed the engineering while reclining on a couch in the studio. On November 12, 1982, Sylvester was in London, scheduled to perform at a club called Heaven, when he got a phone call telling him that Patrick had died. Sylvester relayed the news to the crowd gathered that night in Heaven, the club, and then as a tribute performed Do You Want to Funk? After Patrick's death, people really knew how the virus was transmitted and how to prevent its spread. Sylvester was asked what he would like to say to the gay community about AIDS. Get out of the fast lane for a few minutes. Be just a little more aware of your body. Move over to the slow lane for a couple of days, he said. Don't worry, honey. The party will still be there when you get back. Word. Because I'm from the time where AIDS was so misunderstood, even the medical industry didn't quite understand what was happening with the AIDS epidemic or HIV. They had explained to us back then that although you may test negative now, 6 months down the line, you could still test positive for something that you caught maybe a year ago or 6 months prior or 8 months prior. This was the information that was told to us. So at that point, it had us so afraid, not like now, because then it wasn't like how it is now. Like now, on one hand, if you have HIV, and on the other hand, you have herpes, people would take the HIV because the HIV can be undetected. That goddamn herpes is going to come back whether you like it or not. I don't give a fuck how much medication you take for that shit. Okay? Them herpes is coming back. The HIV, AIDS, that shit suppresses itself if you take care of yourself medically. They ain't came up with no medication that can stop the herpes or slow the herpes down or make that shit, undetectable. No, the herpes don't go nowhere. The HIV will go to sleep. The herpes goes to sleep for about 30 days or 21 days, depending on how stressed out your life is. The way that they had it back then, it was so bad that people were really afraid because you could have a lover or have a misstep 2 years ago and that shit would not show up in your body. That was what was being taught to us about HIV/AIDS. So I made sure that every 6 months I had got me a HIV/AIDS test. And when I went to my doctor was like, well, Nay, you just can't have a HIV test. You got to say something. It's got to be a reason for testing. We know that you only mess with the women. So we got, okay, I cheated on whatever. You know what I'm saying? Say whatever it is you got to put in this paper so the insurance company will pay for it. So every single 6 months, I came to the doctor and told him I cheated on my girlfriend. So here I am now taking the test. I was like, okay, I'm getting everything taken care of. And my wife, my nurse wife, was like, well, why are you getting all these tests done? And why are you getting the AIDS test? Are you fucking with niggas? I'm like, wait a minute, bitch, you don't know me like that. No, but from what I understand, AIDS can pop up at any time. And as a matter of fact, I was with a guy before I was with her. So because I come from the time of that shit can pop up anytime, it was mandatory that I got tested, that I got this AIDS test, even though me and the guy, the Texan, had broke up probably like 2 years before. And I still took it very seriously. This dumb bitch tried to tell me. No, she ain't tried to tell me. She said, Nay, people don't think like that. That's not how the medical industry works. Wait a minute. I don't know what the fuck they told you. I know what they told me back in the 80s and 90s. And I had never gotten re-educated to know that that's not how it works anymore. After a while, it went from every 6 months that I was getting tested to every year. My wife is like 10 years younger than me. So she don't even understand what we were going through in that time period and how scared we were. By reading this just reminds me of how scared we were at that time. We were terrified, y'all. And I mean this. Sylvester had dedicated the song All I Need to his boyfriend at the time, after Michael, after John, a hairdresser in his early 20s named Tom Daniels. In 1982, Tom had been living with a few friends on Fell Street, and since all of them had May birthdays, they decided to throw a big party. A friend of one of the roommates invited Sylvester. Tom had spoken to him briefly, but didn't pay him much mind. The next day, Sylvester invited a crowd of people to his house for brunch, and Tom went along. It was all a setup to get me to his home, says Tom. He was charmed and flattered. He liked Sylvester's face, pretty and glowing, and though he was ambivalent about queenness, in private he found Sylvester quiet and masculine. Tom was not so much smitten as easily persuaded. For me, it was the first time someone was really genuinely interested in me and really was loving and sweet and accommodating, says Tom, sounding not unlike the men who had come before him. He stayed the night, and within a month he was living at the house on Cobbett amid the deco and the gold. Sylvester traveled quite a bit, collecting the pennies, as he called it, to support his ordinary fabulousness. At home he was silly and content to make Tom laugh. People still looked to me as some sort of spokesman, Sylvester told New York Musical Express in 1982. But I think my career has transcended the gay movement. I mean, my sexuality has nothing to do with my music. When I'm fucking, I'm not thinking about singing and vice versa. True enough, it's silly and small-minded to be that reductive about music. But then again, he was also recording on the gayest record label on earth and performing much of the time for people for whom music and sexuality were as entwined as the roots of an old tree. Sylvester, single again, spent a lot of time out and about in San Francisco in 1983, but he seemed to be more and more on the lookout for people who refused to be bothered with conformity and exclusiveness. Sylvester was actually quite shy about approaching men at bars, but usually he didn't have to do the approaching. Jason Williams, the grand sissy, who had admired him for a decade, was shy too. Jason would see Sylvester at bars like the Midnight Sun, where sometimes they'd play Sylvester videos on the big screen at each end of the bar. He and Sylvester always smiled and said hello. One night at the Midnight Sun, Jason, assisted by a cocktail, finally got up the nerve to talk to Sylvester. "I really would like to know you," he said, and asked Sylvester out for coffee. He gave Sylvester his phone number. Sylvester promised to call, but like most men who make such promises, he didn't. When they ran into each other a few days later, Jason was ready to cut Sylvester up with his tongue and give as much sissitude as necessary. "Relax, Jason. It's not what you think," Sylvester said, claiming, as men often do, that he had been out of town. "I'll call you." Soon Sylvester did call, and they sat up at Jason's house until 2 in the morning talking about music, fashion, and jewelry. It felt like a romance. 3 floors with its own drag room and music room. They sat in the middle of Sylvester's bed and played in his jewelry box. And somebody pointed out to me at work, she's like, "Oh, you're a jewelry girl." And I said, I never thought of myself as a jewelry girl, but I think I am, because I have a ring on 6 of my 10 fingers. And if I can get my hands on more, I will. And I love to wear bangles. So I guess I am a jewelry girl. Both my grandmothers had like vanities where I could sit down and just put on all the jewelries. I loved it. You know what? I'm going to get my niece all my jewelries. Sylvester went out on tour a few days later, but he called Jason every day from the road, courting. "Have you been getting rid of every other man in your life?" he said in one call. "'Cause I'm coming home and you're going to be mine." Pause. The problem with Jason and Sylvester was that they both were assuming that each other were bottoms. I don't want to do the bottom. You do the bottom. I'm not a bottom. You do the bottom. Well, how is this going to match? I don't know. Y'all might be bumping pocketbooks and losing change. Both of them were tops. That turned out to be another short-lived fantasy. Jason was not that man at all, and he didn't like that position. I was this little swishy thing that everyone thought was a bottom, but I wasn't, he said. After a couple of dates, they realized they'd work better as sisters than lovers. The sexual revolution has begun to devour its children, Patrick Buchanan wrote in 1983, mixing false pity with barely concealed told you so glee. Buchanan believed, of course, that AIDS was the logical outcome of sexual freedom and gay rights. Many good people knew even back then this idea was at best stupid. But he was right in description, if not in analysis, about the devouring of the children, about the implosion of the sexual revolution. It's hard to be pro-sex, to advocate the throwing off of prudish vanilla norms when sexual contact by 1983, known to be one means of transmission, was becoming so closely associated with dying. By late 1983, most San Francisco gay men and lesbians knew someone or knew someone who knew someone who had entered Ward 5B. That's the HIV AIDS ward in the hospital. Ooh, I'm about to tell y'all something. Listen. So back in 1980, I'm going to say 87, 88, it was a guy from uptown, actually downtown, okay? That means like below Columbia Road. Oh, no, not even Columbia Road. I would say like around by Cadoza, the Clifton Terrace area. And I'm going to leave it right there. And it was a dude that knowingly knew he had HIV/AIDS. He knew it. And what he was doing was going out there and raping girls, giving it to them. What kind of madness is that? But he was only 15 years old, but he had a proclivity to grape beforehand, but one of them girls got his ass. And then now he wants to give it to the girl. I wonder where he is now. I heard he was locked up in New York because after he didn't gave it to all the girls in the D.C. metropolitan area, he went up to New York and started graping up there. Y'all, I ain't lying. I'm telling you the truth. Almost anyone who had spent more than an hour with Sylvester knew that he could not hold on to money. He would spend himself into oblivion, says Michael Bailey, who worked at Megatone Records. He would be buying stuff for everybody, Audrey Joseph recalls. Buying dinners, buying clothes. See a little bauble he'd like, and it was $15,000, and he'd buy it. Even in the lean years, honey, he still spent his money like water, says Jeannie Tracy. Sylvester wasn't making all that much from his recordings, and though he still performed regularly at events around San Francisco, many of these were fundraisers for AIDS organizations, or local politicians, or events like Willie Brown's party for Democratic National Convention delegates in July 1984. Sylvester got even the most uptight Democrats to shake some ass. The bandless road show was unglamorous, to say the least. Drunks tripped over extension cords. The tape would get stuck or be cued to the wrong place. An audience member might read a newspaper while the show was going on. Sylvester made do. If the electricity was gone, he sang a gospel song. If the tape was miscued, he glared at Michael and waited for him to reset it. If a newspaper was read, he snatched it out of the reader's hand and invited her to leave. Don't I look full-on Indian tonight? Sylvester asked Jason Williams, getting ready for yet another gift center party in the summer of 1984. Sylvester's look for the night was intended to accentuate whatever Native American blood he might claim. All black people, he told Jason, like to say they have Indian blood in them. His outfit was sort of Cher circa 1977 and made of rhinestones, turquoise necklaces, bracelets, and earrings, hair pulled back tight across his head. "Why, yes, you do," said Jason. "You look just like a squaw." "You just jealous," Sylvester said, since he was wearing the jewelry he had refused to let Jason wear. "You want to wear the earrings, but you can't. They are too Nelly on you." "Honey, talk about the pot calling the kettle beige," Jason said. "If I'm feminine, what are you?" Sylvester raised his eyebrows. "I am Sylvester," he said. After his set that night, Sylvester toweled off and stood with Jason Williams, surveying the crowd. They noticed a handsome blonde man, 6'2" and eyes of blue, in a Hawaiian shirt. Sylvester was in a shy mood, so Jason approached the man. "You're really handsome, and we love the way you are dressed, and my friend would like to meet you," Jason said, adapting a classic high school girl move. "Would you please come with me?" Sylvester and the man, whose name was Rick Kramer, chatted, and Sylvester asked for a date.